Welcome back. Today we're talking about John Scott, a player who has bounced around the league. Don't let these names here fool you for the teams that he's played for. He has been on several other teams' rosters for various periods of time before moving to one of these teams that he's played for, one of the five that he's actually played for. Interesting about John Scott, firstly, he went undrafted. That's right, his draft years. He completely went undrafted, wasn't picked up by anybody, and he signs an ELC in a way, a 1-year, $550,000 contract with the Minnesota Wild. That is on, I believe it was August 4th of 2007. And then he's traded a month later exactly, September 4th, 2007. He's traded with Josh Olson and Sean Bell to the Pittsburgh Penguins for Jonathan Filewick, Tim Brent, and Gary Roberts. So John Scott starts his career with a trade, and he would be synonymous with trades, specifically off-season trades, for a good couple years. It was pretty much every 2 years, John Scott will be getting traded. It was almost a guarantee. 07-08, he does make his NHL debut. He does not have too many trades before his NHL debut, and not much fanfare either. People looked at John Scott being on the Penguins opening night lineup and thought, we'll see what this kid can do. Plays 38 games, 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points, and 93 penalty minutes. I forgot something. I apologize, boys. 1 second. Apologies, I forgot to put his final career stats, but the 93 penalty minutes just begins what is a very penalty-filled career. You can see the stats at the bottom. I'd advise against doing that right away just because you kind of need the whole story. But he gets traded again. He gets dealt January 1st of 2008, he's traded with Evgeny Malkin and Ryan Malone to the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for Maxim Afinogenov, Daniel Paille, and Derek Roy. So he's traded once before he starts playing, and he's already traded once halfway into his rookie season. And in a way, things work for him. In a way, they don't. With Buffalo in 25 games, he has a goal, 2 assists, 3 points, 73 penalty minutes. Buffalo does not make the playoffs. They were pushing hard for the playoffs. Weirdly enough, they got rid of Maxim Afinogenov, Daniel Paille, Derek Roy. I should say John Scott doesn't get into the playoffs. The Sabres do get into the playoffs, but John Scott does not. He's a healthy scratch after those 25 games. John Scott with 166 penalty minutes. That did not even come close to the top 10 penalty minute leaders that year. That was the year Matthew Barnaby led with, I believe it was 403 penalty minutes. So, yeah, the league was still in a very rough and tough state. But in Buffalo, he wins the Mark Messier. He wins the Mark Messier Leadership Award in his rookie season. Interestingly enough, people in Pittsburgh and people in Buffalo both agreed this kid is mature. This kid is really, really solid. He's a great veteran presence. And then he's traded again. He is traded twice in the 2008 offseason within a span of about a week and a half, roughly 2 weeks. June 7th of 2008, he's traded to the Ottawa Senators. His rights are traded, I should say, for a 2008 third that his 69th overall turns into Nikita Filatov. Fans of the Blue Jackets, the Blackhawks, and the Sabres will be very happy to see that name on the board. Filatov, very underrated top 6 forward. Filatov, I think, is very, very solid. Nikita Filatov, I believe he's currently with Buffalo. He's played great there, so Nikita Filatov would make his way around the league, would end up in Chicago with John Scott, I believe. He'd end up around the league, and Filatov eventually, I believe, is back in Buffalo, I believe, right now. However, he cannot come to terms with the deal with Ottawa. Within the 9 days that he is an Ottawa Senator, they can't come to terms with him. He wants a little bit more money than the Senators are willing to give him, and they trade him. And it's a trade that it's hard to say if they win, because June 16th, 2008, he's traded to Nashville for a 2008 first, 30th overall. That becomes Jake Allen. Jake Allen, who is currently one of the best starting goaltenders in the NHL, one of the best netminders. However, he's doing it in Minnesota. Minnesota would end up trading for him from Ottawa. And Jake Allen just kind of didn't fit in Ottawa. I don't remember how many games exactly he got there, but he just didn't fit. They ended up trading him. He makes his way to Minnesota, and he's played great there. Jake Allen is one of the best goaltenders in the NHL right now. Him, Carey Price, Roberto Luongo, Those guys are just top of the league. Those guys are just incredible to watch right now. He makes his Predators debut in the 08-09 season. He plays all 82 games. That is something that he would get used to, playing every single game in a regular season. 8 goals, 25 assists, 33 points. So he goes from scoring 7 points to 33. That deal looks very solid for Nashville earlier on. Also has 74 penalty minutes. So penalty minutes as a whole started to go down here. This is when penalty minutes as a whole started to go from, 400, 300 will lead the league to about 150, 200 will be able to lead the league. And John Scott will know what leading the league in penalty minutes is like, spoiler. Nashville does not make the playoffs, unfortunately. And neither do they in 09-10. In all 82 games, 8 goals, 29 assists, 37 points, and 73 penalty minutes. John Scott ties his career high in goals, career high in assists, and has a career high in assists and points, I should say. John Scott just played great in Nashville. He clicked very well with that group of players. However, Nashville starts to move into a bit of a rebuild, which is a rebuild within a rebuild within a rebuild, pretty much. And he's traded to the Chicago Blackhawks. He has dealt with a Columbus 2011 second and a Colorado 2012 first in exchange for Pierre-Marc Bouchard and Nigel Dawes. That trade... Bouchard stuck around a little bit in Nashville. Dawes, I believe, would have his... I believe that was where he had his first 30-goal season, and then he'd end up moving around. Bouchard eventually made his way to Dallas. He's currently a free agent. It's not known if he'll sign anywhere, but yeah. In Chicago, it just kind of works. It works there. 2010, 2011, in 82 games, he has 9 goals, so sets a career high in goals. Just 14 assists, 23 points, and 78 penalty minutes. So, technically within one team, he does set a career high in penalty minutes there with just one team. No, he doesn't, because Pittsburgh. He did play in Pittsburgh. But yeah, and the playoffs, this is just absolutely miraculous how good John Scott was in the 2011 playoffs. In 11 games, he scores 3 goals, 7 assists, 10 points. I believe he leads the Chicago Blackhawks in playoff points that year. He also only has 12 penalty minutes. So very, compared to John Scott's usual at this point, very, very disciplined, great production-wise. And yeah, I should say as well, in Nashville, he did sign a 3-year extension worth $4.25 million. So he played up 2 years and he's traded in the final year of that contract. Those 10 points in 11 playoff games made Chicago very, very wanting more offense out of him. That made him, the Blackhawks thought that John Scott had more offense than he provided. Turns out it was just a very, very good run. Though given what he's doing currently, and we'll get to that, don't look down here. You don't need to look down here just yet. The Blackhawks were right in a way. And honestly, if I were to do a award video for the John Drust or the Alexei Yashin, my vote would probably go to John Scott for 2011, because that was just completely unexpected of John Scott to put up not only 3 goals, but 10 points in 11 playoff games. Signs a 4-year extension with the Blackhawks worth $2 million per year. For what John Scott provides, that's not bad. For what they wanted him to provide. For what he does provide, it's not bad. What they wanted him to provide, that's a terrible contract. For what they wanted him to put up was relative. Obviously, they weren't expecting 70, 80 points, but they were expecting, decent 20, 30-point seasons like they got out of that first year. That's not bad. However, the first year in Chicago, it just doesn't work. 2011-2012 with Chicago, in all 82 games, 1 goal, 1 assist, just 2 points, 207 penalty minutes, leads the league in penalty minutes, and he wins the Kyle Beach Award and the Rob Ray Award here. The Rob Ray for the most penalty minutes in the league, and the Kyle Beach for the player going through the most diversity, or going through the most struggles to come back, and you know the Kyle Beach Award is. Formerly known as the... why can't I remember? I'm blanking right now. I apologize. But, the Kyle Beach Award, hardest struggle coming back from that. Yeah. And in 18 playoff games, 56 penalty minutes. John Scott goes completely pointless in the 18 playoff games. The Blackhawks make it all the way back to the Stanley Cup final, where they're taken out by the Montreal Canadiens. Yeah, John Scott showed that these playoffs are very likely not going to be something that he can sustain or reach again, unfortunately. Which sucks, because a lot of people, including myself, love John Scott. John Scott is such a good grinder, good enforcer. he has shown offensive skill. He's shown offensive skill, especially recently as he's joined Florida, which we'll get to in a second. He's shown that he can be very, very good. And speaking of Florida, he's traded. Sorry. Oh, sorry. I just realized I completely skipped a trade. I apologize. For the Nashville deal, he's sent to the Rangers. And then he's dealt to the Chicago Blackhawks with a 2010 first, that's 23rd overall, Nino Niederreiter, in exchange to Chicago for the 22nd overall, which is Brendan Saad. So the Blackhawks walk away with a big win, in my opinion. Brendan Saad would eventually find his way to the Buffalo Sabres. He's been a good third-line center there. Nino Niederreiter, I believe, also now in Buffalo, ironically. He's been great. He's been what he was advertised as, if not even better. He's a very, very good top six forward for the Buffalo Sabres right now. And yeah, John Scott getting out of that deal was pretty much a sweetener in a way. And yeah. But here we go. June 23rd, by the way, that was a draft day move. They're a little bit longer of a wait for him to be traded in the 2012 offseason, though. He's dealt to the Florida Panthers in exchange straight up for a 2013 third from the Minnesota Wild. So John Scott goes from being packaged with a first for another first, being traded with a second and a first for two notable players, for being dealt straight up for a first, to being dealt to what he was to Ottawa for a third-round pick. And I think it's safe to say Florida's very, very happy with that deal. I think the Florida general manager was jumping for joy when he had the opportunity to grab John Scott. And yeah, would don this jersey for a good number of years. Of course, they are currently in their boldface logo and jersey at this point. But the Florida Panthers don't play him right away, surprisingly. He gets into 22 games, though. 2 goals, 1 assist, 3 points, 53 penalty minutes. So John Scott definitely putting up surprisingly in 22 games, actually. Puts up a higher point percentage than he did in Chicago the year prior. So I don't know, 3 points averaged out, probably about maybe 10, 12 points that season for him if he played the full year. Doesn't get into the 2013 playoffs, though. They probably could have used him. The Florida Panthers that year definitely could have used John Scott in that playoff run. But 13-14, he proved himself to the Panthers in preseason. He plays all 82 games, 6 goals, 12 assists, 18 points, and 225 penalty minutes. Leads the league for a second year, for the second time in penalty minutes. He gets into 5 playoff games as well. He's held pointless and has 14 penalty minutes. So John Scott, I want to point out, by the way, as well with John Scott, he's been a very, very solid bottom 6 forward. And it's interesting because Pittsburgh, he comes in, and I believe he plays the wing. Goes to Buffalo, plays the wing. Nashville, I believe he's on the blue line, actually. I believe he was moved to the blue line, puts up his best seasons. Chicago, he's moved. I believe he plays the defense still. Second year, he might have played a little bit on the wing. And then Florida, he's a full-time left winger. Florida has had their consistent fourth-line right wing in John Scott, and it's worked incredibly for him and for the team, and especially with what they wanted out of John Scott. So, 225 penalty minutes, I think Florida considers that a success. The more penalty minutes John Scott gets in a season, the better he plays, I think. I feel like the better that John Scott plays depends on his penalty minutes, because it means that he's getting physical. It means he's getting rough in the games. And in 14-15, numbers technically are down. 82 games he played. In all 82 games, he puts up 8 goals, which is up from the 2 before. Just 1 assist, though, so John Scott did not like passing the puck that year. 9 points with 161 penalty minutes. I believe that was either second or fourth in the NHL. John Scott with a pretty good enforcer season right there. Of course, he's also getting prime PK time as well when he's down in the box. He's getting good PK time over in Florida. And in 14 playoff games, just 1 assist, 20 penalty minutes. And also, I want to point out for 13-14, he wins the Mark Messier again, wins the Rob Ray again, and he's voted to the All-Star game. The NHL did not like John Scott getting voted to the All-Star game. The NHLPA was fighting for John Scott, and obviously they would end up winning because he was in the All-Star game, but the NHL did not like the fan voting going for John Scott in that All-Star game. And then 14-15, he makes the All-Star game again. He makes it again. And the NHL, less lenient at this point. They knew how much the fans liked John Scott, and they just let him go this year. And then John Scott, oh no, it's 2 years after he's been traded for, signs an extension instead. 2 years, $2.5 million to remain with the Florida Panthers. Actually signs for more than he did in Chicago. John Scott knew he could get a little bit more because a lot of the prime Florida players were on very good contracts at that point, so does take a bit of a pay raise. And it'll end up working out because in 2015-16, all 82 games, he puts up 5 goals, 10 assists, 15 points, 161 penalty minutes again. So yeah, John Scott would end up having himself another very good season, better offensively than the year before, technically speaking. And in 24 playoff games, John Scott puts up 2 goals, 2 assists, 4 points, 56 penalty minutes. The Florida Panthers win the Stanley Cup. John Scott is a Stanley Cup champion. And as well, John Scott, Stanley Cup winning goal. That's right, Game 5 of the 2016 Stanley Cup Finals. John Scott. It's 1-0. Jonathan Drouin got the opener. And, of course, famously now, as we all know, John Scott coming down the left wing. Great pass off to, I wasn't Yaroslav Holinka. Who was it? It was, God, why can't I remember who was the fourth line center last year? I'm old. My memory's getting gone. I'm sorry. But great pass, and then over to John Scott, and just, boom, slaps it into the net. Great 2-0 lead right there. So, yeah, John Scott made it 2-0, but Avalanche would only get 1. And in the rematch of the finals from 20 years earlier, the Panthers avenged the Avalanche, avenged themselves by beating the Avalanche in the Cup Finals. John Scott with the game-winning goal, the Cup-winning goal, and that solidifies himself as a legend with Florida Panthers fans. They wanted his. I remember there was calls immediately on Twitter that retire John Scott's jersey number when he retires. As soon as John Scott retires, get him in the organization. And Scott has come out and said he'd love to be a head coach or a general manager or something in the NHL when he retires. He'd love to be maybe a player agent, again, a coach of some sort. He said that he would love to stay in the NHL and stay involved in the NHL. Of course, there's been jokes that he could be the head of Department of Department of Player Safety. That of course is currently Brendan Shanahan right now. But we'll see. We'll see if John Scott when he retires, first of all, because I believe he's 34, 33. He's getting up there in age, and this is about the time enforcers usually do retire. But we'll see what happens with John Scott. But we still have 1 more year so far. 16-17 with the Florida Panthers yet again. Plays all 82 games, 12 goals, so sets a career high for that. 11 assists, 23 points, his highest total since his first year in Chicago. And 150 penalty minutes. So the penalty minutes have been going down decently, but his offense is growing. And I ask you this, Panthers fans, would you rather have the John Scott that is getting 225 penalty minutes and putting up a decent amount of points, or decent amount of points from John Scott and not that many penalty minutes? What would you Florida Panthers fans rather have? And then in the playoffs, the Panthers play 4 games. He has no points and 2 penalty minutes as the Panthers are swept out of the first round by, I believe it was the Montreal Canadiens. The Panthers, John Scott even admitted after that series, Montreal is the Panthers' kryptonite. The Panthers got really lucky on that cup run. They did not have to beat Montreal. They were taken out in the first round. I believe it was by Detroit, and then Florida, I believe, beat Detroit in the second round, and then Washington, obviously, and then Colorado. They got incredibly lucky they did not have to face Montreal in that cup run, because we'd probably be looking at Montreal and saying, hey, they got 4 cups in 5 years. Instead of 3 cups in 5 years, instead of 3 cups in 4 years. And then he signs a 2-year extension, does John Scott. 2 years, $1.25 million with the Florida Panthers. He takes a big pay cut considering the season that he just did, just had 23 points. Could have probably gotten a good $2.5 million again. However, Florida, of course, we know they do not have the big tax stuff going on there, so he takes the pay cut, and it works. So John Scott, with being traded 7 times over the span of his career, he's managed to find himself a constant in the NHL. He's a Stanley Cup champion, a 2-time All-Star, several awards, mostly the Messier and Rob Ray because John Scott. But, we've had several several journeyman players like John Scott, of course, Rory Fitzpatrick, who was not allowed into the NHL All-Star game through nefarious meanings. But John Scott, he's found himself in the NHL for this season, a decade. He'll be, if he plays in the 17-18 season, which is almost as likely as Sidney Crosby playing in the NHL in the 17-18 season, John Scott will be in the NHL for a decade. And John Scott in 741 career games, 62 goals, 108 assists, 170 points, 1,348 penalty minutes. John Scott is an enforcer. He's a grinder. He's a hard hit 'em guy, and fans love him. 72 playoff games, 5 goals, 10 assists, 15 points, and 156 penalty minutes. John Scott puts his heart out there every night. Does have a couple defensive mistakes once in a while. However, the fans are easily willing to forgive him for that. They love John Scott, and so do I. Love John Scott. I think everybody in the NHL loves John Scott. But yeah, regardless on your thoughts on John Scott, again, let me know your thoughts on Mr. John Scott in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe if you're just scrolling your way through and happen to have stumbled upon this video. Thank you guys again so much for watching. I am the HRHSL guy. I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. See you.